I know him amongst friends. Many of you I've known for years and years, and so and I'm surprised that you all came to see me speak again. So. But it's great to be here. I'm going to tie in the Olympics and World War II. Do you know who Karoli Takacs is? Of course you don't. He is. He was an Olympic shooter. He won the Olympic gold medal in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin in pistol shooting. Yes, pistol shooting with his right hand. World War II, a hand grenade blew up and blew off his right hand. And in 1948 in London, he won the gold medal with his left hand.
Oh, wow.
It's an astounding Olympic story. So, nothing to do with my talk today, but I had to throw it in. Can I first ask, because I feel woefully inadequate to prepare and to give this presentation. Now, Bill and I have been friends for decades, and we've kind of shared an interest in World War II history together, and so he actually called me and asked me to present this, and it's a little intimidating. But can I just ask, though, if any of you have served in the armed forces at any point in your life, could you please stand so we can recognize you, please? Come on, don't be shy. Please stand. Okay, thank you. Can we give them some more? So, many of these people that we read about, I mean, these are heroes to me, and I use the word hero very carefully. I really cringe sometimes if that title is thrown out towards athletes in light of what we're going to discuss today. I gave a presentation. I speak or have been speaking for a living for all these years. I gave a presentation once to Marie Callender Pies. Spoke to all the managers of all the Marie Callender restaurants throughout the country. Got some coupons too, so it was nice. And they said, hey, we want to make a video of you before we speak as an introduction. I said, I've got some footage, I'll just bring it along and we'll show it. He goes, no, we want to make our own. All right, so they made and they edited this really nice video, set to music and narrated. It was kind of a biography. It was way over the top. And I'm in the back room thinking, wow, this is way over the top. I can't believe that this is how they're introducing me. And I'm getting more and more embarrassed as they do this. But it finished with, please welcome an American hero, and I died. I thought, I can't believe it. I thought about anybody that ever served in a uniform, whether it's in the military or as a peace officer or as a fireman, has to see me as a hero. And so and they said, you can use this video for future speeches. I said, well, thank you very much, and I took it. And I thought, well, it's a cool video, but that whole last part, I got to get rid of it. So I took it down to Greg. Some of you know Greg King, who produces corporate videos and does corporate meetings. I said, Greg, you got to edit this whole last half of this video out. I said, I just can't show this. And really, my actions are justified when we discuss these men that I'm going to share with you today. I love the books of Stephen Ambrose. He's a great World War II historian. He also wrote the book Undaunted Courage about the adventures of Lewis and Clark. Probably the best book written, I think, about their travels across the very young United States. He wrote D-Day, he wrote Band of Brothers, he wrote The Wild Blue, he wrote Citizen Soldier. I've read all of those books. What I like about the way that he writes is that, in essence, all of his works in World War II are just oral histories. He doesn't embellish, he doesn't really editorialize when he writes. He tries to make sure that whatever he discusses is really the words of those who live these experiences. And so there's a different feel to it, actually a bit of a grittiness to it. And so I appreciate the way that he writes. We probably have parents or relatives or people that we know that served in World War II. I remember when I was sitting with my dad, I said, Dad, I need to get your life history. We need to get it down on paper. We need to write something. So my dad we have a book that was produced just for family members of my father's life. My dad's 94 years old now. But as I was going through things with him, as recording him, I said, now Dad, tell me now about World War II. I said, so where were you when the war broke out? He says, oh, that's easy. He says, I was at Cal Berkeley. I was getting my engineering degree. I said, so what happened? He goes, well, it was December 7th. It was a Sunday, and I went to church. After church, we heard that that the Japanese had invaded Pearl Harbor and that we were at war. And so then I enlisted, and I said, okay, so yeah, I get that, Dad. That was December 7th. So when did you enlist? And he looked at me almost with scorn, and he said, December 8th, son. And I said, oh, I didn't know. He says, everybody did. He says, I had to take a bus to the ferry to cross the harbor, to get to a trolley, to get to the recruiting depot, and the line went completely down and around the block as far as the eye could see. And he says, and I got up to the front finally, and the guy looked at me and said, Sonny, you're too short, so we really don't need guys like you. And he says, so don't bother. And my dad sat down on the steps and started to cry. And an officer walked up and said, what are you crying for, Sonny? They used the word Sonny all the time back in those days. And he said, they won't let me in. They said I'm too short. He says, hell, I'll let you in. He says, come follow me. And he says, what can you do? He says, well, I'm an engineering student at Berkeley. And he says, we can use engineers. And he says, look, I'm small, I'm short, I could fit in a submarine. You could use me. And he was serious about that. And so they said, well, we need engineers. We'll pay for you to finish your degree, which is a great blessing for my father and for his father to be able to have them pay for his degree. And so he got his engineering degree. By that time that he got his degree, the United States really kind of had control of the seas, and the need for engineers and submarines and submarine warfare had diminished. So my father never saw combat. But I'll never forget the look that he gave me when he said, I enlisted the very next day. So this, I'm going to have to go back and start over here. So I'm going to begin. So this, I'm just going to give you, it's kind of an embellished book report on this book, Band of Brothers. And let's see, forgive me. Okay, so and I was also able to, as you know, HBO did a show, Band of Brothers. It was actually very, very well done, and did it with the consultation of many of those who served. And they would begin each episode by interviewing them. And so there's a tremendous amount of footage of interviews of the actual men that served in Easy Company. And so I'll just begin with this. So this is the beginning of the words in their own words. I'm not showing any of the HBO show, just their interviews.
We were in a store, and a guy in that store told us to put our uniforms on. What the hell are you talking about? He says, the USA is in a war with Japan. We couldn't believe it.
Well, our country was attacked. It's a different, it wasn't like Korea or Vietnam. We was attacked. And, it's a feeling that maybe we're just dumb country people, but where I come from, but a lot of us volunteer.
Who would like to volunteer for the Tank Corps? Who would like to volunteer for the Air Force? Who would like to volunteer for the Navy or whatever? And then they said, who would like to volunteer for the Airborne? So we said, what the hell is the Airborne? Nobody ever heard of it.
We came from a small town, and 3 fellows in that town that were 4F committed suicide because they couldn't go. A different town.
I did things, I didn't do them for medals, I didn't do them for accolades, I did them because that's what had to be done.
Yeah, I said, well, you jump out of airplanes. You got all your Army equipment, you jump out of airplanes to fight the enemy. They said, go to hell. Nobody put up their hand. And then I don't know what it was, brought it up, but the guy giving the speech was saying, but you get paid $50 a month more. So that made it $100.
So those are the actual men of Easy Company. Band of Brothers is about Easy Company, the 506th Regiment of the 101st Airborne. This is the story of one small group of men, and this story could be replicated probably in book after book after book if the same amount of research and interviewing had gone on with other companies in World War II. So this really kind of is a microcosm of really what took place, I think, in the war. These are young men that many of them came from the Depression, they all came out of the Depression, but many of them came from very difficult circumstances. Many just lived in poverty. There were actually some very wealthy desired to join the Airborne. They wanted to jump out of airplanes. Some of them did it for the thrill. Some of them joined for the pay, as you just saw. Some of them did it for just the challenge to see if they could actually do it. They wanted to challenge themselves. But I think in many and most cases they did it because they did not want to go into battle with a poorly trained or poorly conditioned or poorly motivated draftee on their side in battle. They thought, if I'm going to survive, I want to surround myself with the best soldiers I can possibly surround myself with. So for many of them, it was a calculated decision to try to survive the war. The 101st Airborne then trained in Camp Toccoa, Georgia, and in the summertime it was brutally hot there. Next to the camp was a hill called Currahee. Now Currahee, apparently in Indian tradition, stood for "We stand alone together," and that became kind of the motto of the 101st Airborne, was Currahee. And one of the soldiers, when they arrived in that first day of training, says, "I bet at the end of our training they're going to make us run to the top of that mountain over there." And so they were all called into order. They said, "Change into your shorts." And the first thing they did was run to the top of the mountain the very first day. Sometimes they would do it 3 or 4 times in a day. They would do long hikes with packs. They would do 11-mile hikes with their packs early in their training. Easy Company, because they were so fit, actually answered a challenge when I believe Colonel Robert Sink, who was the commander of the entire regiment, had read that a group of Japanese soldiers had marched 100 miles in 72 hours. And so he had Easy Company march 118 miles. They did it in 75 hours because he didn't want to be outdone. And so these men, they learned to jump out of airplanes. They had all different types of training that washed out many of them. The first weekend they got leave where they could go away, many of them came back late, and the colonel took the last soldier that came back late from each company and ceremoniously ripped their patches off them and sent them off to another group. They were out of the airborne. And so that quickly added some more discipline to the group. The original commander of Easy Company was a man named Herbert Sobel. He was a taskmaster. He got these men into probably the best shape of all the companies in the regiment. He was brutal, and I'm going to share with you just some words about him so you understand his leadership style, if you could call it, and then the person that succeeded him. But the commanding officer was tall, slim in build, with a full head of black hair. His eyes were slits, his nose large and hooked, his face was long, and his chin receded. He had been a clothing salesman and knew nothing of the out-of-doors. He was ungainly, uncoordinated, in no way an athlete. Every man in the company was in better physical condition. His mannerisms were funny. He exuded arrogance. He was a petty tyrant put into a position in which he had absolute power. If he did not like a man, for whatever reason, he would flunk him out for the least infraction, real or imagined. There was a cruelty to the man. On Saturday morning inspections, he would go down the line, stop in front of a man who had displeased him in some way, and mark him down for, quote, dirty ears. After denying 3 or 4 men their weekend passes on those grounds, he would shift to dirty stacking swivels and keep another half dozen or so in barracks for that reason. When someone was late returning on Sunday night, the next evening after a full day's training, Sobel would order him to dig a 6-foot by 6-foot by 6-foot pit with his entrenching tools. When the pit was finished, Sobel would tell him to fill it up. Sobel was determined that his company would be the best in the regiment. His method of ensuring this result was to demand more of Easy's men. They drilled longer, they ran faster, and they trained harder. The only problem was he was a horrible soldier. Apparently he couldn't read a map. He would say to his XO on a training run, "So where are we?" And everybody knew he said that because he had no idea where he was. And he made snap decisions, which are not good to make in the heat of the battle. In one instance, when they had an assignment to go into hiding and wait for another group during their training to come, and they were going to ambush them kind of as an exercise, as soon as they got close, he shouted out, "Here they come!" And they just knew, these soldiers knew that he was going to get them killed. And it was so stressful to the soldiers that they actually took this to Colonel Sink, which is a big no-no. Many of them lost rank because of that. Because this was wartime, they could have been imprisoned. And yet, I think word got back, and just through viewing it, Colonel Sink realized that they were probably right. And so he transferred Sobel out to some other training assignment. Having said all that, the soldiers did say this, that he got them in the absolute best shape they could possibly be in. And in many cases, what he did for them also saved their lives because of the condition that they were in. Now I contrast Sobel with another man who really became kind of the theme of the book. I think that was unintentional when Stephen Ambrose began his research. But he talked, he wrote a lot about Lieutenant Dick Winters, who ended up being promoted in the field of battle to captain and then on to major. He was, as we read about him, was just a remarkable leader, had tremendous skills. And about the leaders that the soldiers did admire, they said this. They said, these are first-class people, and to think that these men would care and share their time and efforts with us seemed a miracle. They taught us to trust. A private raider in his wrote about Winters. He said, Winters turned our lives around. He was openly friendly, genuinely interested in us and our physical training. He was almost shy. He wouldn't say the S word if he stepped in it. And then he said this. He says, nor at any time did Dick Winters pretend to be God, nor at any time did he act other than a man. He was an officer who got the men to perform because he expected nothing but the best, and you liked him so much you just hated to let him down. He was and is all but worshipped by the men of Easy Company. And these men, after their training, of course, they were shipped off to England, where they prepared for that epic invasion of Normandy. The job of the airborne was to fly in during the night before the morning assault on D-Day on the beaches of Normandy, on Omaha, Utah, Sword, and the various beaches there. And so they were to fly in either drop from airplanes or fly in on gliders behind enemy lines to try to advance backward toward the enemy that was firing on the beaches. And one of the jobs of the airborne was to take out the large 88 or 105 guns that were firing shells onto the beach. And so the problem was that as they were flying, then they started getting hit with anti-aircraft fire, which caused a lot of panic among some of the pilots. Many planes were shot down, and after all this training, there were many men that fell to their deaths without ever seeing one moment of combat. Dick Winters, I saw in an interview separate from this, as I was researching this, I saw him interviewed, and he said that he remembers flying over, getting ready to drop in his parachute out of the plane, and he said he began to pray. And he says, I didn't pray that I would survive this war. I prayed constantly that I could do my job, that I could protect my men. And they, when they dropped, they dropped out of their landing zone. Many of the pilots panicked and just pushed the green button and said, get them out of here, because they wanted to turn their planes around because their planes were getting shot up so badly. So many of them dropped miles from their intended location. The map that they had of the invasion on the beaches were on a silk scarf that they held in their pockets. So they could open up the scarf and they could read the map of the invasion and know where they're supposed to be and try to figure it out by the road signs in the dark while they're being fired upon by panicked German soldiers who knew that they were Americans that had dropped all over the lines and British soldiers that had dropped all behind their lines. As daybreak came, they found that there was a gun off in near Brecourt Manor that was firing shells on Utah Beach that needed to be taken out so that they could land safely on the beach. And as a result, they looked to Captain Winters, who had basically a crew of men. Some of them didn't even belong to the company. They just tried to grab soldiers that ended up in their general area. And he took only 12 men to try to take out this gun. These were not the German 88s. These were actually French 105s, a larger caliber shell, but from World War I that the German army had taken from the French. And they were using this gun to fire on the beach. And so he would, Winters then crawled in the grass across a meadow. In fact, I've got, this is actually Eisenhower talking to Schweizer. So at Brecourt Manor, when he crawled under the tall grass, it's all noted here, this is a recent photograph, he found that there were actually 4 guns and that were firing, and a much larger group of soldiers that were protecting the guns. And it was all earthen trenches all around it so that they could move around and move the guns in these trenches. And he realized that that was the best mode of attack, was to get into the trenches and then just work their way down the trenches to try to take out gun after gun. They put down 2, so he put down 2 machine gun placements, and they had flanking fire to try to confuse the enemy, and then one by one they would drop into these trenches and work their way in. He eventually was able to take out each gun and cause the troops that they didn't kill to scatter and run away. But it also caused a lot more fire to come their way because of there were so many German soldiers in the area, and he lost, I think, 4 men that day. When he found when he blew up the gun emplacements, they also found the maps of every single gun placement on the beaches of Normandy.
Wow.
And they were able to bring that back, and it was a tremendous grab of intelligence to help them in the war. It was such a textbook. It was such a textbook assault that up until the writing of this book, it was taught every year at West Point. And Winters actually was Colonel Sink put him up for the Medal of Honor for that very first battle of the war. But only 1 man per division was given the Medal of Honor, and that went to another soldier from a different battle that day. When Sink told him that he was recommending him for the Medal of Honor, this is a good leader. His response was, "Well, that's nice. What about the medals for my men?" And from that single battle, Winters earned the Distinguished Service Cross. Of the other Easy Company men that day, Buck Compton, Bill Garnier, Gerald Lorraine, and Joe Toy got the Silver Star. Carl Lipton, Joe Malarkey, Mike Ranney, Joe Liebgott, Walter Hendricks, John Plesha, Cleveland Petty, and Robert Wynn got the Bronze Star for that. Now, I can't go on without commenting on Buck Compton. He was an All-American athlete from UCLA. Thank you, I had to do that for Gene. He actually became the district attorney in the city of LA. He prosecuted Sirhan in the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. He was part of that group and went on to do amazing things in the war. And now, understand, this is the first morning after this is the morning of D-Day that this took place, as they took out these guns. And that cleared the way for troops to land on Utah Beach. Utah Beach was not nearly as bloody as Omaha Beach. And one of the reasons was because these guns were taken out. But in the book, you read about the soldiers who were able to get on the beach without having to see the combat that the first few waves saw, which was brutal for many. Yet on their march into Normandy, they were surrounded by corpses and dead bodies and mangled and broken bodies of German and American soldiers. And it talked about how it just caused many of them to stop by the wayside and just vomit because they had never seen anything like this before in their lives. This is their first real exposure to what they were going to be seeing in the next few months. Very soon after the taking over on Brecourt Manor. By the way, this is Bill Garnier a few years ago visiting Brecourt Manor because he was one of the soldiers that was involved in that battle. You see him on his crutches. His leg was blown off in Bastogne by an artillery shell. And this is him later. You'll see a little bit of him when I show a little interview with him later. After that, by the way, after that first battle, I forgot, and this is what Steve wrote about Winters after that first morning. He says, before lying down, Winters later wrote in his diary, I did not forget to get on my knees and thank God for helping me to live through this day and ask for his help on D+1. And he made a promise to himself, if he lived through the war, he is going to find an isolated farm somewhere and spend the remainder of his life in peace and quiet. Next came, very soon after that, they needed to take the town of Carentan, which was occupied by the Germans. And they needed to, they sent Easy Company in to try to begin the process of getting the Germans out. The problem was that in the main road that led to Carentan, there was a perfect placement of guns by the Germans, and it was very easy to take them out. Let me just, and before I do that, let me just set the stage a little bit before I describe this battle, and I'm going to step out of the war and jump to a modern experience I had with someone that has nothing to do with battle, but it has a lot to do with leadership. So I'm very good friends with Valerie Condos Fields, who is the head women's gymnastics coach at UCLA. My wife was on the team at UCLA. They've won the NCAA 6 times. She's a remarkable person, just a terrific, principled, integrity-filled individual. And she's married to Bobby Fields, who's an assistant athletic director at UCLA. Total gentlemen, they're just great people, that I really admire. And my wife and I were out to dinner with Valerie and Bobby. And I just noted that Bobby was just a very soft-spoken gentleman. And I'd been around football practice when I was in college, and I knew how football coaches treated their athletes at times. And there's a lot of yelling, and there could be a lot of profanity, and a lot of whatever it takes to get these guys going. And I was witness to that. And at the end of the evening, I said, Bobby, I said, I'm sorry about this, but because he used to be the defensive coordinator of the football team, I said, I don't see you as that kind of a guy. And I said, how did you motivate your athletes in a sport that's so physical? And so he says, Peter, he says, when I was a boy, my family, we moved to Texas. My home basically backed into railroad tracks, and a train would come by our home in the middle of the night. Those first few nights when that train came by, it was so loud it threw me out of bed. But after a few nights, I slept right through it. That's how I feel about yelling. He said, I don't raise my voice, hardly ever, but when I do, he says, then my athletes will pay attention to me. He says, and I felt I was much more effective to only do it when I needed to do it. So, I tell you that to tell you this story about Richard Winters. As they came into Carentan, the Germans waited until the American troops were well exposed, and then they just unleashed on them, which caused them just to scatter to the sides of the road. And here's just the account, and it's much better if I read it than if I try to describe it. At 0600, so early in the morning, Winters ordered move out. Welsh, who was his best friend with another group, kicked off the advance, running down the road towards the T-junction, some 50 meters away, his platoon following. The German machine gun opened fire straight down the road. It was in a perfect position at the perfect time to wipe out the company. The fire split the platoon. The 7th man behind Welsh stayed in the ditch. So did the rest of the platoon, almost 30 men. They were face down in the ditches on both sides of the road, trying to snuggle in as close as they could. Winters jumped into the middle of the road, highly agitated, yelling, "Move out, move out." It did no good. The men remained in place, heads down in the ditch. From his rear, Winters could hear Lieutenant Colonel Strayer, Lieutenants Hester and Nixon, and other members of the battalion headquarters hollering at him to get moving. Winters, get them moving. Winters threw away his gear, holding onto his M1, and ran over to the left side, hollering like a madman, "Get going." He started kicking the men in the butt. He crossed on the other side and repeated the order, again kicking the men. "I was possessed," Winters recalled. "Nobody ever seen me like that," end quote. He ran back to the other side, machine gun bullets zinging down the street. He thought to himself, "My God, I am leading a blessed life. I am charmed." He was also desperate. His best friend, Harry Welsh, was up ahead, trying to deal with the machine gun. If I don't do something, Winters thought to himself, he's dead. No question about it. But the men wouldn't move. But they did look up. Winters recalled, "I will never forget the surprise and fear on those faces looking up at me." German machine guns seemed to be zeroing in on him, and he was a wide-open target. The bullets kept snapping by and glancing off the road all around me. Everybody had froze, one of his men remembered. Nobody could move, and Winters got up in the middle of the road and screamed, "Come on, move out, now." That did it. No man in the company had ever before heard Winters shout. "It was so out of character," Stroll said. "We moved out as one man." According to Winters, it said, "Here is where the discipline paid off. The men got the message and they moved out." once said this. And then he said to Winters, he said, "I will never forget seeing you in the middle of that road. You were my total inspiration. All my boys felt the same way," end quote. Carentan was a pretty bloody battle. Winters actually was injured slightly, wounded slightly in Carentan. But they were able to take the town, and that was the beginning of it. And that's Dick Winters a little bit later. Now, the next major battle that they saw, I'm only going to cover one more and just say a few more things about him, was in Bastogne. And in Bastogne, as you recall, we've all heard of the Battle of the Bulge. Well, as the American troops were advancing towards Germany, Hitler thought he had one last effort that he thought he could make by causing his troops to kind of meet in one spot and try to burst through the lines and then circle back around to take over the American troops. And so that was the bulge that he created with that advance, and so that's why it's called the Battle of the Bulge. In one case, though, in the city of Bastogne, the entire company and many of them were completely surrounded in Bastogne, and so they basically had to hold out in Bastogne and prevent them from taking the town again. The problem was that they were running out of ammunition. They had very little supplies. They didn't have much. They didn't have adequate clothing. Many of the drops for supplies landed in the hands of the Germans, and so it was a very desperate situation. And in many cases, I read each man had one bullet in his chamber. That's how limited they were. They just had to hope that the Germans wouldn't advance. This is what one colonel said about Bastogne. He said, "Riding through the Ardennes, I wore woolen underwear, a woolen uniform, armored force combat overalls, a heavy lined trench coat, 2 pairs of heavy woolen socks, and combat boots with galoshes over them. And I cannot remember ever being warm." So I was just in Utah this last week. It was 9 below when I went up to Idaho to visit some friends, and I thought about that, trying to get ready for this, and I just thought, I can't imagine. I wouldn't have survived. I'm a human goose pimple when it gets cold, and I just would not be able to survive. In fact, one of the heroes, and let me just get off of Dick Winters for a second. One of the heroes, many of the heroes to many of the men, though, were not the other soldiers, but it was the medics. And here's just one paragraph that stood out to me about the medic. "The medics were the most popular, respected, and appreciated men in the company. Their weapons were first aid kits. Their place on the line was wherever a man called out that he was wounded. Lieutenant Foley had special praise for Private Eugene Rowe. He was there when he was needed, and how he got there you often wondered. He never received recognition for his bravery, his heroic servicing of the wounded. I recommended him for the Silver Star after a devastating firefight when his exploits were typically outstanding. Maybe I didn't use the proper words and phrases. Perhaps Lieutenant Dyke didn't approve, or somewhere along the line it was cast aside. I don't know. I never knew except that if any man who struggled in the snow and the cold and the many attacks through the open and through the woods ever deserved such a medal, it was our medic, Gene Rowe." And I don't really have much more to say about Bastogne other than it was just a moment that they just simply had to endure, and they did. As the war came to an end, they kind of were chosen because of the incredible job they had done throughout the war to go ahead and take Hitler's Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. And this is where all of the elite of the German military would gather. This is where Hitler would gather. It was basically a resort town, and he had this kind of mountaintop palace, essentially, at about 8,000 feet. Had an elevator that led to the very top of it that was covered in, the walls of the elevator were inlaid in gold, and it just kind of, and this is what they were asked to go ahead and take. And by this time, the war was coming to an end. And this is actually a color photo, I guess a colorized photo of the actual Men in Easy Company. And this is as they had taken over the Eagle's Nest, and now we're kind of preparing for the end of the war. But here's, and this is Dick Winters with his one of his good friends, his XO, Lewis Nixon. Dick Winters actually ended up working for Lewis Nixon and his company. I mean, he developed a certain type of feed for cattle, or I think it was, and Winters became a very, very successful, wealthy man. Anyways, I'm rambling now, but let me just share with you a few things people said about Dick Winters throughout this. Bill Garnier said that when he said "let's go," he was right in the front. He was never in the back, a leader personified. Now, Bill's the one that had lost his leg in Bastogne. Ed Heffron, Babe, his nickname was Babe, said he was one hell of a guy, one of the greatest soldiers I was ever under. He was a wonderful officer, a wonderful leader. He had what you needed, guts and brains. He took care of his men, and that's very important. These are these two men as they visited the cemetery on Normandy. That's the cemetery right above Omaha Beach. I was actually there when my son served at his 2-year LDS mission there, and he actually served in Normandy on his mission. And he said that they didn't necessarily want to hear the message of the church, but they sure loved having him around because the older folks down there loved the Americans for what they did for them in the war. My son was he was well received everywhere he went. On one of his days off, his preparation day, he and his mission companion went over to this cemetery, and it was the end of the day. At the end of the day, they're retiring the American flag, and one of the men noticed my 2 sons, and he looked at them and said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "We're from the United States." He says, "Either of you boys know how to fold an American flag?" And they said, "Well, we're both Eagle Scouts." He says, "Would you like to do it?" So my son was able to lower the flag and fold it at the end of the day in the cemetery on his missions. That was kind of heartwarming to hear that in a letter that he wrote home to me. This is what Floyd Talbot wrote about him. He says, "You are loved and will never be forgotten by any soldier that ever served under you. I would follow you into hell." And in essence, I think, for the most part, they did. And if I could just share with you a little snippet about how they felt about Dick Winters. And this begins with Dick Winters.
Leader, you lead
This is
the way.
him.
Not just on the easy, you take the tough ones too.
A good leader has to understand the people that are under them, understand their needs, their desires, or how they think a little bit.
It seemed like he always made the right decisions along the way. He was a real soldier. Like some of the officers, I don't think I'd follow them in the water. But he was one of the best.
He went right in there and he didn't, he never thought of not being first or sending somebody in his place. I don't know how he survived. But he did.
So philosopher J. Glenn Gray, in his work The Warriors, said this: "Organization for a common and concrete goal in peacetime organizations does not evoke anything like the degree of comradeship commonly known in war. At its height, this sense of comradeship is an ecstasy. Men are true comrades only when each is ready to give up his life for the other, without reflection and without thought of personal loss." And then Stephen Ambrose wrote this: "The comradeship formed in training and reinformed in combat lasted a lifetime. 49 years after Toccoa, Private Don Malarkey of Oregon wrote of the summer of 1942, quote, 'So this was the beginning of the most momentous experience of my life as a member of Easy Company. There was not a day that has passed since that I do not thank Adolf Hitler for allowing me to be associated with the most talented and inspiring group of men that I have ever known.' Every member of Easy Company interviewed by this author for this book said something similar." And then, by the way, when Dick Winters finished the war, he wrote this. He said, "In 1951, I bought a farm along the foothills of the Blue Mountains in Pennsylvania, 7 miles east of Indiantown Gap. That's where I find the peace and quiet that I promised myself on D-Day." And I'd like to finish just with the end of a little set of interviews with these men. I'm going to have to scroll a bit, so bear with me. But I just want to finish with this. By the way, you can get all this on YouTube.
He might like to fish, you know, he might like to hunt.
Okay, wait a second, here we go.
Feeling it's a very unusual happening, and it's a very unusual bonding.
We knew that we could depend on each other. And so we were a close-knit group.
Just brave, so brave was unbelievable. And I don't know anybody that I admire more than Gil Garnier and Joe Toy, and they were very, very special.
I'm just one part of the big war, that's all. One little part. And I'm proud to be a part of it. Sometimes it makes me cry.
The real men, the real heroes, are the fellows that are still buried over there and those that come home to be buried.
Seemed like you thought that you could do just about anything. And after the war was over and you came back out, well, you lost a lot of that. Or at least I did. I lost a lot of that confidence.
He's hoping to stay alive, that's all.
Henry V was talking to his men. He said, from this day to the ending of the world, we in it shall be remembered. We lucky few, we band of brothers. For he who today sheds his blood with me shall be my brother.
Do you remember the letter that Mike Rennie wrote me? You do? Do you remember how I ended it? I cherish the memories of a question my grandson asked me the other day when he said, "Grandpa, were you a hero in the war?" Grandpa said no. But I served in a company of heroes.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to just look into. I read this book years and years ago, and so when Bill asked me if I could prepare this, I thought, sure, but I don't feel qualified. I don't feel worthy to talk about these men, and I never served as they did, but I sure am grateful. I'm grateful to live in this country. I'm grateful that we have the freedoms that we enjoy, and it would not have come without the sacrifice of many men who never came home. And I'm really grateful for that. So I appreciate your time. I wish I could answer questions for you, but we're kind of running out of time. And I don't know that I have the answers for you because I'm certainly not an expert at this. But thank you, Bill, for giving me the chance to kind of review all this again. And thank you for helping me to become a better person by doing that. I really appreciate it. Thank you.